The moment King Charles realized Meghan Markle's past was no longer buried, everything changed, and this time there was no royal shield waiting to save her. The alarms didn't sound loudly. There was no dramatic announcement, no explosive confession broadcast across every screen. Instead, it began with something far more dangerous, a quiet leak, a single sentence that slipped into the public like poison in clear water. Meghan Markle, in a moment that was never meant to escape private walls, allegedly referred to a former relationship as the biggest mistake of her life. It sounded harmless to outsiders, almost therapeutic, like the kind of emotional closure celebrities casually mention when rewriting their personal narratives. But insiders immediately understood the magnitude of what had just happened. Because this wasn't just any relationship. This wasn't just any ex. This was Cory Vitiello, the one man who had remained silent while Meghan's life transformed from struggling actress to royal duchess under the global spotlight. And silence, when it lasts that long, becomes more than restraint. It becomes leverage. Cory didn't react the way critics expected. He didn't sell interviews. He didn't rush to tabloids with accusations dripping in revenge. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He acknowledged the moment without truly acknowledging it. A carefully placed signal, a subtle gesture, a reminder that he still existed. And in the world Meghan had carefully constructed, his existence alone was enough to threaten everything. Because Cory wasn't a rumor. He wasn't speculation. He was a witness. He had been there in Toronto before the crown, before the titles, before the carefully curated image of resilience and reinvention. He had seen Meghan during the years she later compressed into neat sound bites and polished interviews. He had watched the transformation in real time. And now, with a single remark from Meghan dismissing their shared history, the silence he had granted her was no longer guaranteed. Inside royal corridors, panic didn't look like chaos. It looked like calculation. Advisors didn't scream, they didn't scramble, they reviewed, they assessed. Because what Cory represented wasn't gossip, it was exposure. The monarchy had survived scandals before, but this was different. This wasn't an enemy attacking from outside. This was someone from within Meghan's past, someone whose credibility came from restraint, not noise. Cory had nothing to gain from destroying her publicly, and that made him the most dangerous kind of threat imaginable. Institutions know how to fight enemies motivated by attention or money. They don't know how to fight someone motivated by memory. What made Cory's quiet reappearance even more destabilizing was the timing. Meghan had built her identity on narrative control. Every interview, every public statement, every carefully delivered anecdote had reinforced a consistent storyline of struggle, perseverance, and ultimate triumph. Her biography wasn't accidental. It was engineered. Relationships that didn't serve the story faded into the background. Timelines were streamlined. Emotional arcs were simplified into something audiences could easily understand and defend. And for years, no one challenged it. Not because it was flawless, but because no one with first-hand knowledge chose to contradict it. Until now, Cory's silence forced a terrifying question into public consciousness. What else had been curated? What else had been simplified, compressed, or quietly omitted? He didn't accuse her. He didn't deny her version of events. He simply existed. And in doing so, he destabilized the illusion of narrative exclusivity. Because shared history doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everyone who lived it. And when one participant decides to stop protecting it, the entire structure begins to crack. Behind palace walls, King Charles didn't need dramatic proof to understand the implications. He had seen this pattern before. Reputation doesn't collapse all at once. It fractures slowly, beginning with doubt. His advisors began reviewing timelines, not gossip timelines, but institutional ones. They examined every intersection between Meghan's past and her entry into royal life. They weren't searching for scandal. They were searching for vulnerability, because vulnerability is what threatens legitimacy, and legitimacy is what the monarchy protects above all else. What made the situation even more volatile was Cory's reputation for meticulousness. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't careless. Those who knew him described him as methodical, someone who remembered details with precision. Dates, messages, locations. This wasn't speculation. It was personality. And the idea that someone like him might still possess records, evidence of moments long considered irrelevant, introduced a level of uncertainty no public relations strategy could neutralize. Documents don't respond to messaging. They exist independently, immune to narrative control. Meanwhile, Meghan found herself trapped in a psychological paradox. Responding publicly risked validation validating the controversy. Remaining silent allowed speculation to grow unchecked. Every option carried risk. Every move invited interpretation. And Cory, by refusing to escalate, maintained control of the battlefield without firing a single shot. He had shifted the conflict from evidence to perception, from facts to doubt. And doubt is far more corrosive than accusation because it lingers. It infects everything. The public, sensing the shift, began to reevaluate. Supporters who once defended Meghan unconditionally found themselves hesitating, not because they believed accusations, but because uncertainty had entered the conversation. Critics didn't need proof. They only needed the possibility that proof existed. And possibility, once introduced, becomes permanent. Inside the monarchy, the response was even colder. King Charles didn't issue statements. He didn't offer protection. He did something far more devastating. He stepped back. And royal silence isn't neutral. It's deliberate. It signals distance. It communicates that whatever consequences emerge will not be absorbed by the institution. Meghan was no longer shielded by royal authority. She was standing alone. This wasn't personal. It was strategic. The crown survives by isolating risk, not absorbing it. And Cory's existence represented unpredictable risk. He wasn't hostile, which made him harder to discredit. He wasn't reckless, which made him harder to dismiss. He was simply present. And presence alone was enough to unravel years of carefully constructed narrative stability. For Meghan, the realization was devastating. Her greatest strength had always been narrative authorship. She spoke first. She framed events. She defined meaning. But Cory's silence stripped her of that advantage. You can't argue with someone who hasn't spoken. You can't disprove what hasn't been revealed. And you can't regain control over a story that now belongs to two people instead of one. King Charles understood this instinctively. His priority wasn't Meghan's reputation. It was the monarchy's survival. And survival requires sacrifice. By refusing to intervene, he ensured that whatever damage occurred would remain contained. Meghan wasn't being punished. She was being separated. The distinction was subtle but devastating. The monarchy had quietly drawn its line, and Meghan Markle, for the first time since entering royal life, was standing on the wrong side of it. Prince Harry felt it before anyone said it out loud. The shift, the invisible fracture that didn't explode but instead spread slowly, silently, like a crack beneath glass that still appeared whole from a distance. Nothing in his world collapsed overnight. There were no screaming confrontations, no dramatic ultimatums, no doors slammed in fury. What made it worse was the quiet, the unbearable quiet, because Harry had built his entire adult identity around one core belief that whatever chaos existed outside, whatever cruelty came from the press, whatever betrayal came from the institution he walked away from, he at least knew the truth inside his own home. He believed Meghan was his certainty, his refuge, his clarity, and now that clarity was dissolving, replaced not with proof, but with something far more destabilizing: possibility. It wasn't Cory's silence alone that shook him. It was the precision behind it. The way Cory never sounded emotional, never sounded bitter, never sounded desperate. He sounded calm, certain, like someone who didn't need to prove anything because he already knew. And Harry, a man who had spent his life navigating public illusion, recognized that tone immediately. It was the tone of someone holding leverage without needing to use it. And leverage doesn't threaten loudly. It waits. It breathes. It lingers. In private moments, Harry replayed timelines in his mind. Dates he had never questioned before. Stories he had accepted without hesitation. Memories that once felt complete now felt edited, trimmed at the edges in ways he had never thought to notice. None of it confirmed betrayal. None of it confirmed deception. But it confirmed something else. He hadn't seen everything. Meghan, sensing the distance growing between them, leaned harder into control. Her words became sharper, more precise, more deliberate. She repeated assurances. She reaffirmed loyalty. She reinforced the narrative they had built together. But reassurance, when it arrives too carefully, stops sounding like truth. It starts sounding like strategy. And Harry, who had sacrificed everything for authenticity, began to feel the unbearable irony closing in around him. He had abandoned a palace built on centuries of controlled narratives, only to find himself questioning whether his own life had been constructed with similar precision. The realization didn't make him angry, it made him quiet. And quiet Harry was far more dangerous than angry Harry, because anger fights, silence observes. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles had already made his decision long before anyone outside realized it. He didn't need to condemn Meghan. He didn't need to defend her either. His power wasn't in confrontation. It was in absence. He understood something Meghan had underestimated. The monarchy doesn't collapse under scandal. It survives by refusing ownership of personal instability. And by stepping back, by allowing Meghan to face the storm without royal protection, he had effectively drawn an invisible boundary between her past and the institution's future. It was surgical, cold, absolute. There would be no royal intervention, no protective statements, no institutional rescue. Whatever truth emerged or didn't would belong to Meghan alone. This distance sent a message louder than any public declaration ever could. The crown was preserving itself, and preservation always comes first. Advisors reviewed every intersection between Meghan's history and her royal entry, not to punish her, but to ensure nothing from her past could contaminate the monarchy's legitimacy. Because legitimacy isn't just about truth, it's about perception of control. And Meghan, for the first time, was no longer in control. The public could feel it too. The shift in tone, the subtle hesitation in her appearances, the careful selection of words that once flowed naturally but now landed with calculation. Audiences weren't listening the same way anymore. They weren't absorbing her story. They were analyzing it. And analysis is far more dangerous than criticism because it never fully ends. Criticism burns out. Analysis lingers. Every past interview was revisited. Every timeline re-examined, every omission reinterpreted, and Cory, by doing nothing, had ensured the process would continue indefinitely. Cory himself didn't celebrate. He didn't escalate. He remained exactly what he had always been, silent. But now his silence carried weight, immense weight, because it wasn't empty. It was intentional. He had achieved something far more powerful than exposure. He had achieved permanent uncertainty. Meghan couldn't force him to speak. She couldn't force him to disappear. She couldn't force closure. And closure was the one thing she needed most. Without closure, the narrative remained suspended, incomplete, vulnerable. Every future achievement would now carry a shadow of unresolved doubt. Inside their home, Harry's transformation became impossible to ignore. He didn't accuse her. He didn't interrogate her. He did something far more devastating. He withdrew emotionally, not out of punishment, but out of protection. Because the moment certainty disappears, vulnerability becomes dangerous. And Harry, who had once trusted without hesitation, was now protecting himself from questions he didn't know how to ask. Their conversations became functional, necessary, polite. But the effortless intimacy that once defined them had shifted into something fragile, something conditional. Meghan could feel it slipping. The one thing she had fought to secure, the absolute loyalty of the man who chose her over the crown, was no longer guaranteed. Not because he stopped loving her, but because love without certainty becomes complicated. And complication introduces distance. Distance introduces silence. And silence, she now understood better than anyone, can destroy everything. The monarchy watched without intervening. King Charles understood that time would do what confrontation never could. Time exposes weakness. Time erodes illusion. Time reveals truth, not always through evidence, but through endurance. By waiting, he allowed reality to separate itself from narrative naturally. He didn't need to ruin Meghan. Her loss of narrative control was enough. And in the end, that was the true collapse. Not a public scandal, not a courtroom revelation, but the quiet destruction of certainty. Meghan had built her life on authorship. She was always the one telling the story. Always the one defining meaning, always the one in control. Cory's silence had taken that away. He hadn't exposed her. He hadn't destroyed her. He had done something far more permanent. He had turned her from author into subject. Harry stood in the middle of it all, carrying the emotional weight no one else could see. He hadn't lost his title. He hadn't lost his platform. But he had lost something far rarer, the unquestioned certainty that his life, his love, and his escape from royal illusion had been entirely real. And once that certainty is gone, it never returns the same way. King Charles remained distant. Cory remained silent. Meghan remained visible, composed, articulate, but no longer untouchable. Because the most devastating ruin isn't public destruction, it's private doubt. And doubt, once introduced, never truly leaves. Never truly leaves. Never truly leaves. Never truly leaves.